All right, welcome back to the Roast It Yourself podcast brought to you by Coffee Bean Corral and Current Crop Roasting Shop. I'm Stephen Burnett with Coffee Bean Corral in Jackson, Mississippi. And with me, as always, is Catherine Mansell, Certified Q Grader and Director of Current Crop Roasting Shop in New Orleans, Louisiana. Catherine, how are you today?
It's good. It's spring break down here, so there's a lot of people up and down the street, smelling the coffee, coming in, seeing what we're up to in here.
So you're not getting a break at all?
No, definitely not.
No. Well, that's
Nor
a good
would I
problem.
want one yet.
Right, it's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have. Well, each week we set aside about 10 minutes to field questions from home coffee roasters and professionals alike about roasting, tasting, and most importantly, enjoying coffee. You can send your questions to questions@riypod.com. That's questions@riypod.com to get a nice shout out from us in an upcoming episode and to get your question answered. Now, this week we have a question from a listener who says he's a new listener, new home roaster. That's why we're doing this, isn't it, Catherine?
Yeah.
That's exactly music to our ears.
Yeah.
Exactly. New listener, new home roaster. How long should I let the beans rest before I brew or pull shots of my coffee? Thanks, Michael in Atlanta, Georgia. All right, Michael, new roaster, fantastic question. And I appreciate that you separated out brew or pull shots because they kind of, they're different. They're different. We'll get into that in a second. But yeah, Catherine, hit us with it. How long should he let this coffee rest?
Sure. Well, the length of time needed to degas depends on which roast level that you're taking the coffee to. Because as you're roasting, there's moisture and gases that are being produced and escaping. During the first crack, the moisture that's being built up is escaping and causing that really loud pop, that first crack that we all know. And during the second crack, gases like CO2 are escaping, and they're making that light but very rapid popping and cracking sound. So the further you get into the darker roast, more of those gases are escaping. Therefore, your darker roast doesn't have to degas as long because a lot of that has escaped as you're going through the second crack. And also, once you get to that darker roast, your beans are, getting more light in weight and they're getting brittle. So any of the CO2 that is trapped on the inside of the bean, it can easily escape. So it doesn't have to degas as long or rest as long. But for a light roast, those beans are a lot more dense and they never get to the second crack. So there's really no chance for that CO2 to escape as you're roasting. So all of the degassing time for a light roast is really because the beans are so dense and all of that CO2 still needs to escape. So normally what we do here is the light roast, I'll wait for maybe 8 to 10 days before I'll try it. Medium roast, 5 to 6 days, and then dark roast, 1 to 3 days. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Stephen, about, I've had an anaerobic natural process needing 20 days or so to degas before you got to that full flavor. And then once you get to brewing, it's different depending on if you're blooming, if you're going straight into espresso. So brewing, depending on what brew method you're going to choose, also will give you a better indication of how long your coffee needs to rest.
Yeah. Number one, I would just say experimentation is key. Being a coffee roaster, you actually get the chance to know the exact roast date, and you can taste it at various times after that to see, okay, is it good now? Is it good now? Is it good? Are we there yet? That kind of thing, right? And I think the number one takeaway on this is that coffee is always changing. Once you roast it, once you start roasting it, that coffee is going to keep changing. You've set off a chain reaction, dominoes fallen, right? And that's something to keep in mind that, and this is especially true for the espresso thing. I'm an espresso guy. I love espresso. And you got to keep in mind that the rate of change is going to go down as time goes on, right? So in the roast, obviously the coffee's changing radically in, 10 minutes, right? Well, after that, it's still changing. It's just not changing that drastically at all. If you put coffee in and this is something that is a practical matter. If you go in to dial in your shot for a coffee you roasted yesterday, It'll take you a little time to dial it in. You'll get it dialed in. You're like, sweet, this is a good shot of espresso. It's a little maybe bitter because of the hasn't had a chance to off gas yet, but cool. Tomorrow it'll be a different coffee. You'll have to redial it in again. So just
Right.
as a practical
Yeah.
matter, you're going to have to. You don't want to start throwing coffee into an espresso machine that's that fresh. You want to let it wait. I like your timetables, and I like that
Yeah.
there's play in them too. Like you didn't
Yeah.
say, medium roast 7 days. It's a medium roast 7 to 10 days, right? Like,
Yeah.
because it's
Right.
gonna be a little bit different.
Yeah.
The good news here is that what we're talking about is we're talking about taking a coffee that is excellent and making it like having it when it's even better, or having it when it's
Yeah.
only excellent, or having it when it's a
Right.
little bit less than just excellent, like it's really good, better than anything else you can get. And so the
Yeah.
idea is aim small, miss small. Our margins aren't going to be that big a deal. It's not like if you're off by a day, it's now bad coffee, right?
Right.
It's still
Yeah.
great. It's just a matter of, are you going to taste it when it's at its peak? And be aware that at its peak is a kind of a, depending on the coffee, more of a narrow window. So just enjoy it, like enjoy that
Yeah.
process. I did have a coffee, and it was probably the most expensive coffee I've personally purchased per
Yeah.
pound. I think it was something like a little 4 ounce tin, and I think I paid like $40-ish for it. I don't remember. It was a lot.
Wow.
It was a
Yeah.
lot, and it was
Yeah.
some sort of super light roasted. I think it was a Colombian natural. It was something. I didn't know as much about coffee. I was still very much an amateur at the time, but I was like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do this, and I got it in, and I couldn't wait to try it, and I ground up like, and you're at this point, you're like counting the beans out, right? When it's that little and that much. There
Right.
was no guessing. I wasn't scooping. I was like literally measuring as tight as I could. And I brewed it up so carefully, and I was I was pour over, and I watched it like a hawk, and I did the whole thing, and I sipped it, and it was just not good. There was no flavor there. I was kind of mad, to be
Yikes.
honest. And
Yeah. I bet.
you spend that kind of money per whatever that per pound is. It's like it's that $120 a pound, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
60, 160, I think. Dear Lord. Anyway, it was
Wow.
crazy. Um, but I did that, and I called a buddy of mine who recommended it to me, and I was like, hey, man, this is terrible. Like, why did you recommend I spend this money? And he laughed. And he said, you've already gotten into it? And I was like, yeah. And he said, dude, you need to wait like at least a month before you even crack that. And I was blown away. But it goes to show, and
Yeah.
by the way, people don't ever finish their stories. I hate that. I did, and it was pretty good
Yeah.
after a month.
Yeah.
It still wasn't, I
Yeah.
mean, I was kind of already sour on it at that point. It was better,
Yeah.
noticeably better.
Right.
But that just goes to show that it is very coffee specific. Those super light roasts do take longer to kind of develop flavor and come into their own.
Yeah.
And yeah, keep in mind if you're getting into roasting, your new roaster, you said, which is awesome, that the the way you brew coffee is more or less forgiving, right? Like, cupping coffee is pretty forgiving. You can be pretty standard with it. There's not a filter to mess up. It's just set a timer, put the water in, and go.
Yeah.
Other espresso's not forgiving at all. So if you find that you're like not sure if this coffee's at its peak or not, use a more forgiving brew method, and you'll actually get more life out of it, I think, in that regard. You'll
Yeah.
get a longer phase where it's actually really, really at its peak. So, but yeah, good questions. Now,
Yeah.
that's the correct answer. We've given the correct answer, Catherine. For me, the real answer is I kind of roast it and then forget and then brew it whenever. And maybe that's 2 weeks from
Yeah.
now. Maybe it's the 2 days from now. And I just
Yeah.
brew it and enjoy it, because that's the great thing
Yeah.
about being a coffee roaster, right? Like,
Well, yeah, exactly. I have a quick story because we recently got a new Ethiopian natural down here, and I was pretty excited about it. I was roasting at home. I wasn't roasting up here. I've got a little fresh roast at home, and I was playing around with lengthening and shortening processes, and sort of excited for it. And then I brought it up to work, and I put it in the kitchen, and I just sort of let it alone, and then realized a couple of weeks had gone by, and then grabbed it, made it in a pour over, and it was absolutely fantastic. And, normally I'm going, 8 to 10 days, but it was clearly over 14, and it was beautiful. It was
yeah,
such a good
yeah.
cup of coffee. It's a
That
nice
is outstanding.
surprise.
And that's the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about this is, this is why, you know, get, we give away sample packs when we sell roasters at Coffee Bean Corral, and that's great. I always recommend people get like 3 pounds of one coffee. If you've got a
Yeah.
roaster like the Fresh Roast, you can get, if you have the 800, that's half a pound each. And so you can get, 6 roasts out of 3 pounds of coffee. And that way you'll
Yeah.
get the same coffee and you can try it over time. You can try different roast techniques, but you can also
Yeah.
experiment with resting and seeing what this coffee is going to be. This is not
Yeah.
something that you learn. This is something that you kind of learn the rules of thumb on and get to like experiment with the individual coffee and see what you like. But that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Catherine, like I think we might have covered everything. I know there might be another video out there on the internet that has more than we said about it, but
Right.
basically, right? No, I don't know.
Basically.
Okay, but
Maybe.
for whatever it is that we may have left out, if possible, we encourage you
Yeah.
listeners to come into our comments and tell us. Share
Yeah.
how long you typically let coffee rest. Are you somebody that like roasts it and throws it? I know in Ethiopia they roast it and grind it and brew it right there, right? That's the traditional way.
Yeah. Right.
So if you're a listener from Ethiopia, we'd love to hear from you. Actually, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But put that in the comments. Let us know how long you let coffee rest. How you think about it. Do you obsess over it? Is it a big deal, or do you just kind of like have piles of coffee lying around like I do and just kind of go with whatever you feel like in the moment? Let us know in the comments. Like and share this video, like this podcast, share it with your friends, get them into coffee roasting. That's our whole goal. We want to make more new roasters like Michael, and people that are excited about it, that are got bit by the bug, and now they can enjoy coffee the way they make it, the way they want, whenever they want. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, which is always a ton. So please leave us that rating and review. We want to watch this podcast grow and continue to like spread and find new people that want to learn about coffee roasting and want to kind of get a beginner's perspective, because we're sitting here trying to help people get started, and so that's really what we want to do, and the big focus of it. We could not do this, however, without the people at Current Crop and at Coffee Bean Corral that both give us the time to do this and sit down and talk to each other over the internet and answer questions, and also help us to sound good and look good. Hopefully we got these little new lapel mics. Hopefully they sound a little bit better. We're trying to improve things little by little.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for that. That help us with that here. As always, if you have any questions at all about coffee roasting, tasting, enjoying any of that, you can email those to questions@riypod.com. That's questions@riypod.com. But otherwise, have a great day and happy roasting.
Thanks, Michael.